Hey, welcome folks to It Doesn't Hurt to Ask, the podcast that I do with Fundraising Lab that talks with people who are shift disturbers in the sector or who are doing really cool things in the sector. And when I met our guest today, I thought he's doing some pretty cool things and I would love to chat with him on the podcast. So I'm delighted to introduce Joel Zola. Joel rhyming with Noel. I was glad when you reminded me or pointed that out to me. So I guess you get a lot of mispronunciations of your name.
Yeah, every now and then, but I know sometimes people pronounce my name Joel, but I pronounce my name Joel Zola, like Noel. Yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
All right. So you're the executive director of a organization called Street Voices. Can you tell us
Yes.
about what Street Voices, what it's all about?
No, for sure. So we tackle homelessness through our directory of free services, and our other mission is to empower marginalized voices through our media platform. So I guess to provide context, I was homeless for 7 years. At the age of 15 years old, I was kicked out the house. So between 15 and 22, I was basically a homeless youth living in shelters across Canada. And then yeah, so while living in shelters, I realized there was a need for platforms, especially a platform that target that specialized to marginalized youth. And the forum that we decided to create was a magazine, and Street Voices went from a magazine onto a directory, and I can go more in depth, but that's essentially the short version of why I started Street Voices.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being willing to share that. So wait, can you just talk about the directory a little bit? So it's like a directory of the kinds of services that young people can find if they're struggling with homelessness.
Yeah, exactly. So while being a homeless youth, I had to rely a lot on free services. Had to rely on free food, free clothing, free programs, etc. So it was tough to navigate and know where to find all these places, especially if you go to Google, there's a whole bunch of other content on there that may not be relevant to a homeless youth per se. So yeah, so the solution was to create a directory that was more tailored for people in this circumstance. And go to shootwith.ca, you'll see that we have a shelter section, employment, legal, food programs. You can go to our directory and search by type of services. Like we target youth, but we even have adult services. We have women services. We have services for different marginalized communities. And yeah, yeah,
Okay, and that's mostly in the Toronto area.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In the
Okay.
GTA, yes.
Okay, GTA. All right. So you started Street Voices how long ago?
I started Street Voices 9 years ago.
9 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
And now recently you've started to be more intentional about fundraising. How did you come to that decision?
Yeah. So I think how we came to that decision is, so when I started Street Voices, at the time it was a vision. I wasn't driven by money or anything. It was more like I knew that this is a platform that we needed. So basically, so my mindset was we're gonna create this platform. I didn't know anything about a grant or anything, and then I started working at Sketch, and then Sketch I worked at a community center called Sketch Working Arts as a community artist as a 1 year contract, where I got trained in the fields of like the nonprofit sector, grant writing, event planning, etc. So Sketch introduced me into the world of grants. Didn't even know what a grant was. And then I applied for my first grant while working at Sketch, with the mentorship of Sketch and the tutorship and all that. And then yeah, we end up getting it, and then we end up getting into the cycle of applying for grants. And meaning that we like a lot of people in our field can relate that where grants becomes a major source of your income. And the thing about grants is grants can be very inconsistent, and Street Voices, we've created programs that have came and went. Like we had a program called Find Your Voice, and that got funding and it went. We had another program called Word on the Street that got funding and it went. So we've been around for a long time. We had a print magazine. The funding for the print magazine came and went, so we had to move everything online. So I guess when I'm just like listening myself talk, the reason why we open up that portion of revenue stream is to just be more sustainable. And so we can have like our programming kind of stay, because the fact that Shoewish is still here means that the community definitely sees the value in us. And it can be very like unencouraging for youth when they enter a program that we create and then figure out like a year later it no longer exists. So what we're hoping to do with opening up this new stream of revenue is create something more sustainable, so basically we can continue the impact that we're creating in the community.
Right. Yeah, that's tough, right? When you start programs and then they begin to do you see some really great work that's happening as a result of it, and then the funding ends, and you have to end the program. So yes, all of us in the sector have been there and felt the sting of that. So I feel your pain.
Yeah.
So so tell me about how you started. Like, what, I know you're at the really early stages, but maybe
Yeah,
just
no, for sure, for
just
sure.
talk about the first few steps.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I think like I've always wanted to work in media. So I knew I wanted to work in the media industry, and I'm a homeless youth. So I at the time, I basically told the staff that I wanted to start a magazine for homeless youth, for the kids in the shelter. The staff in the shelter I was living at a shelter called Eva's Phoenix Youth Shelter.
Yep.
So the shelter I was living at actually happened to have a print shop where you can yeah, just print whatever you needed to print. So I let them know that I had this magazine, and the staff helped me coordinate the other residents, and together we created the first pamphlet. It actually wasn't a magazine, it was a pamphlet called Street Voices, and a collection of poetry. And then I was disappointed because I wanted a magazine, instead we got a pamphlet. And then when I asked about this, they told me that I needed a graphic designer. At the time, I had no idea what graphic design was. So what I ended up doing was joining a program called the Remix Project. And the Remix Project is another program in GTA where basically where they taught me graphic design. And I didn't actually end up becoming the graphic designer, but I ended up connecting and meeting my graphic designer into the program. As well, at the same time, I also got hired at Sketch as a community artist, right? And Sketch used to have this 1 year contract that was open up where they would train marginalized youth in in um in a community arts field. So at the time, I was a homeless youth with no education who
Mm.
was basically in the Remix Project learning graphic design, and at Sketchworking Arts basically learning basically just learning more about the community arts field. And so yeah, so the mixture of the two experiences um gave me the resources, the knowledge, and the connections to basically launch the actual first issue of the magazine, because 2012 was the pamphlet. So whenever people ask me how old is Street Voices, it actually depends on what we're referencing, because usually I reference the print magazine first. That's what I usually reference first. But prior to the print magazine, we did have a pamphlet that launched in 2012. I was 19 years old, and it was a project that stemmed from a youth shelter. 2 years later, we launched the first print magazine, and thanks to Sketch and under their guidance, what has turned into a print magazine, fast forward 9 years later, has now become a full-time job and a career path, not just for myself but for our peers that we work with, that we hope can definitely be the next generation of Joel Zolas to create a voice for marginalized youth.
So I love that. Shout out to Sketch, shout out to Eva's, shout out to the Remix program. I'm not familiar with that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
So now 9 years later, you've had some success with some grant writing,
Mhm.
and you're wanting to be more intentional about fundraising.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you came to that. I mean, you already talked about how you want to have more sustainability.
For sure.
But how did you start?
So I think we came here because like like the story I just said of creating a program, and then because usually a grant cycle usually lasts like a year, and creating a program and then a grant cycle is done and the program's gone. A lot of people in our world can actually relate to this. So what I started doing is I started looking at like like the big organizations like the YMCA's, for examples, which is another nonprofit, or Sick Kids, which is the next nonprofit, and just seeing that these nonprofits are they're operating with much at a more sustainable level. And I realized that the difference between them and myself and my peers is that they operate off of donations, while no, sorry, they don't operate off of donations, but they have a major donations revenue stream is what I meant.
Yeah.
And that is a stream that was not open at all at us at all. um so yeah, and even with that, I should even just shout out like our mentor organization, which I call our mother organization, Sketchworking Arts. And just seeing that like even Sketchworking Arts, for example, like they've been at it for years, and we look up to Sketch. So we know that the next logical step, if we're following a similar path, would be to start collecting donations, which at first it was something that it was tough for me to do. Like we used to sell the magazine for $5, but we never used to accept donations. Um, because yeah, for multiple reasons, it didn't feel right at the time. It didn't feel ready. And also I didn't know what this thing was that I was creating. Like I wasn't sure if it was a nonprofit. But I knew it was a cause, and I knew our mission was to change the world. But the corporate structures like
Yeah.
nonprofit, charity, social enterprise, for profit, it was still new to me. But a year ago, we've actually like came to the conclusion we're a nonprofit. That's the route we're going. And yeah, making us a nonprofit means that we're now eligible to provide tax receipts and collect donations and fundraise to eventually lead this to become a sustainable mission.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what are your observations about your early days of fundraising?
Yeah, no, for sure. So one thing I can say is like we sent out a like my early days of fundraising. So I guess like so we sent out an email blast, and then I didn't properly review the email list. So I sent a few people duplicate emails. So if any of them are watching this, that's what happened. Um yeah, so definitely that was like a trial and error. Um but it still feels pretty new. I don't feel like I've fully done it, because I think one thing that we plan to do is we plan to start booking speaking gigs and stuff, and start like talking more about street voices with the public, but also with just more private individuals as well, and just sharing the story. So I feel like I'm just now getting my feet wet, and a year from now I'll probably have more to tell you.
We'll follow up in a year from now. And full disclosure that we met because you reached out to me and we're actually doing some coaching together, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can say that. We can let people know that
Yeah, for sure.
we know each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it has been really interesting to work with you and your colleague, and watch you as you're really learning um, about fundraising. And I think the email experience was a huge learning opportunity for you, right? Like even just the fact of like, well, I looked through the email list and there was a bunch of people we didn't want to email to, and as you said, maybe we sent a few duplicates by mistake. I always say nothing teaches you how to fundraise like fundraising.
Mhm.
And I think that's what I'm seeing with you guys, that you're, and what I really appreciate is that you're experimenting, like you're actually trying stuff. And in so doing, you're learning. And so I see how each time you kind of learn something new, it's almost like I see the light bulb go off and you can see what maybe the next step is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, how does it feel? Like, does it feel time consuming? Does it feel like, is there anything that has come from your early experimentation that has led you think to any aha moments?
Um, so any aha moments, you know, I think I think how does it feel? It doesn't feel much different. I feel like it's a new territory, but it's the same land, you know? And the reason why I say that is because like as ED or the founder of Street Voices from the beginning, your job is to figure out how you're gonna raise funds, you know? So I think so so I would say and even before like even thinking about raising funds, we've always thought about how can we reach our message to people? How can we communicate? I feel like the only difference now is like we're it's the same message. The only difference is now we're asking for people to donate that can donate, right? So I would say yeah, I would say it feels like the same job. It doesn't feel any different. It is a new task and it is a new ask, you know, new task, new ask. Um but I would say overall it is yeah, it doesn't feel that much different, but like I said, maybe a year from now, I may have a different answer. Yeah.
Right. So I really want to reinforce something that you said, which is as the executive director, your role is to figure out how to raise money for the organization. And the
Yeah.
only reason I want to reinforce that is because sometimes executive directors don't necessarily acknowledge that that is a big piece of their role. And that's
Mhm.
especially if they have the good fortune of receiving a lot of government funding, and so they don't need to incorporate philanthropy as much.
Yeah, I think for me, like as the founder and starting this thing literally while I was a homeless youth, you know, it's kind of surreal that this is an idea that got me out of homelessness. You know, it's very, very surreal. It's like you realize from the beginning you gotta raise funds, you know, because the number one question that I used to get asked when I did start this was, how are you gonna get money? You know? That was like the number one question. And then especially I think too, I was under external pressure too, because I remember when I first came up with the idea for Street Voices, the shelter told me that I need to find a real job. And they told me that if I didn't find a real job, they're gonna kick me out. Cause I was in Eva's Phoenix, it's a transitional home.
Right.
So there's transitional homes and there's emergency shelters. So they're gonna kick me out the transitional home and move me to the emergency shelters, which is worse than the transitional home. And so I was under a lot of pressure to basically get money, you know, and I told them my job was Street Voices. They told me it wasn't a real job. Luckily, I landed the sketch position, which was great. So then I was able to still work on Street Voices and say, you know, but then the question still came was, how are you gonna make money? How are you gonna get money? So when you're working at an early stages, especially in my situation, I think people are also asking me how are we gonna get money because I'm a homeless youth on top of that, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
so coming from that, it kind of gets reinforced that, hey, if this thing is going to work out, you're going to need to find a way to generate some kind of revenue. Yeah, you know. Mhm, mhm, yeah.
So, listen, I just have to tell you, it is a pretty remarkable story. to go from being homeless yourself to now running an organization that supports countless young people across the city. I feel honored to know you, Joel, and thrilled to be working with you, and really look forward to seeing what you're able to accomplish with fundraising. And, you know, if you've been able to accomplish this, I think fundraising is just going to be another one of those barriers that you will overcome.
Yeah, no, thanks. And yeah, no, I look forward to it as well. I think that one thing to point out is that we are in a transitional period, you know, we're transitioning from a project to hopefully a self-sustaining organization. And you, Cathy, you play a big role in that, being the fundraising consultant that we've hired. And yeah, and thank you for being part of this journey with us. And yeah, I think I think you're closing the interview, right? That's why I'm also kind of, yeah. So I was gonna say thank you for having me as well. Yeah.
Oh, well, and I have one last question, which is there anything that you want to say, or is there a question that I should have asked you that I didn't?
So what I want to say is for people who are watching, or youth that are, or not even youth, anybody that that has an idea that they want to execute. I think my first thing, let them know is that it's not as easy as it looks, you know. And the reason why I gotta say that is because I think that whenever I try something new, I usually I start off with a lot of enthusiasm, feeling like, yeah, I'm gonna, you know, like for example, I said I was gonna do the magazine at the age of 19. I didn't actually do it till the age of 21. So that was 2 years of telling people I was gonna do a magazine. And that was because I underestimated what it took, you know? But the second half of what I have to say is, even though it's not as easy as it looks, if you truly see the vision, don't give up on it, because it will manifest, you know? So I definitely do want to leave that message out there. Um, because I do know that if I'm rewinding, I was a homeless youth where people were telling me to get a real job. People were asking me how I was gonna make money. People were felt like it. There's people who flat out just told me they didn't believe in the vision, you know. And here we are. The same thing that I didn't give up on is the same thing that saved my life, you know. So
Wow,
yeah, I want to leave people with that.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
If people want to learn more about Street Voices, where do they go?
Yeah, so you can follow us on social media at Street Voices TO. Our website's www.streetvoices.ca. And yeah, you know, check us out, Instagram, TikTok. Yeah.
And if they want to make a donation, you'll have a donate button up on your website by the time this airs.
Yes, hopefully by the time this airs, we will have a donation button ready. It's in the process. Yeah, so hopefully by the time it airs, you go to streetvoices.ca, click donate, and yeah, support us on our mission to empower marginalized voices.
You rock, Joel. It's a pleasure working with you, and it was a pleasure chatting with you today. Thanks for joining me.
No worries, Cathy. You have a good one.